Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Wednesday video. We have a returning guest to the channel, so he wasn't scared off the first couple of times. We have the great Len Heinz. You may recognize him from previous interviews, but this time he's going to talk to us all about a book that he has written and is, at the time this video is going live, hopefully just released on good bookstores. So if any of you want to visually spot it, here it is. The Fleet That Fought Itself. And if you haven't guessed by the title of the book or the title of the video, what we're going to be talking about, suggest English lessons, really. But there you go. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the Spanish Navy, which, as is the case in most civil wars, it found itself on both sides of the Spanish Civil War in the late 1930s, which is perhaps sometimes a little bit forgotten and overshadowed by World War II, but very often a test bed by various nations for some of the technology and aircraft and ships that we would see used in Second World War. But we're going to talk specifically more about the Spanish experience of it today. So I guess, firstly, we've already said who you are, but perhaps you'd like to tell everyone some of your other works if they want to follow up on those as well.
Well, first of all, thanks, Drac, for having me. It's great to speak with you again, and I look forward to talking about the Spanish Navy and the Spanish Civil War. When I tell people that I've written a book about the naval aspects of the Spanish Civil War, the first question I normally get is, "Were there any?"
Yes.
And hopefully in this talk we'll discover that yes, as a matter of fact, there were many different maritime aspects.
Mm.
In addition to this book, I am the co-author with Vince O'Hara of Clash of Fleets, which is a battle history of World War One.
Hmm.
Innovating Victory, which is a book that looks at six different technologies and how navies use them in the first half of the 20th century. And I've also contributed a chapter to a book entitled Fighting in the Dark,
Hmm.
where I was thrilled to be invited with a number of other naval authors to each contribute a chapter about how various navies dealt with the challenges of night fighting. But this is my first solo effort.
Fair
Uh,
enough.
Also extremely happy that Seaforth Books decided that yes, actually, maybe the naval aspects of the Spanish Civil War were something that would be of interest, and hence the book.
So links to all of those down below. I'll try and put USNI and Amazon links because that should cover most of the civilized world. So I guess let's start off with when the Spanish Civil War starts. What state is the Navy in? And given, shall we say, the role that some South American navies played in actually starting revolutions, not only what state was it in, but did that state or just it generally have anything to do, particularly with instigating the Spanish Civil War?
Let's start with the state of the Navy. And maybe the simplest way to say it is that the state of the Navy was half built.
Hmm.
The the Spanish Navy was a fairly small force because Spain was at that time a fairly poor nation and poorer as a result of the Depression. Uh, the Naval Ministry in the 1920s had started a fairly ambitious but also reasonably sensible scheme to build out a modern navy, but hadn't made a lot of progress with it. So at the time of the revolt of the generals that kicked off the Spanish Civil War, which was July of 1936, the Navy had one old battleship in commission, I think of a type that you referred to, Drac, as Baby's first battleship,
Yes.
glorified coastal defense vessel. Four light cruisers, three of which were quite potent units, 11 destroyers, a dozen submarines, and five gunboats. So a relatively modest force, but one that had seen action in the 1920s, fighting in or supporting the army fighting in Spanish Morocco. and also, they it conducted maneuvers. It was a reasonably active force in the 1930s, but incomplete in the sense that there were several additional units that were planned to be added that were at the time of the revolt afloat, but not finished. There was an old battleship that was out of commission. There were two cruisers that had been launched, but not yet completed, heavy cruisers of the treaty type, six destroyers and another three mine layers. So, as I said, it was a half-built navy at that point. There were plans, and those plans had been executed to a degree, but not fully executed. There were decent base facilities. The Spanish Navy historically had paid considerable attention to base facilities, and that was true even in the 1920s and 1930s. Well, they decided not to build a torpedo factory. So that was one weapon of war that was not readily available to them, which I think played a significant role in the Spanish Civil War, the way the Navy fought that war on both sides. Um, it's surprising to me, but the Navy really did not play a major role in the general's revolt that took place in July of 1936. In fact, it almost played no role at all prior to the revolt in spring of 36. Francisco Franco, who of course came
Mhm.
to lead the revolt as things developed, was exiled to the Canaries. And while there, talked to Spanish naval officers that were uh, uh, there for annual fleet maneuvers. And at that time, he went to the army plotters who were plotting the revolt and said, have you talked to the Navy? And they
Mhm.
said, well, no, we really don't know that they'll play a significant role. And anyway, we know that all the naval officers are sympathize with us. They're on our side. They're at least some of them are monarchists. So, all of them are fed up with the left-leaning government that was in place at the time. So there were very, very few naval officers, if any, who were active participants in plotting the revolt. The expectation of the plotters seemed to be more that, once the revolt was kicked off, the Navy would just follow along.
Well, I suppose that leads quite neatly into the second aspect of the question is that how did the Navy react to
Yeah.
the outbreak of war? Was it, did they all go, oh, okay, we're all going to back the Republicans, or are we all going to back the Nationalists, or was it a kind of a split, or what?
It was a reaction that I would describe as uniformly divided. And what I mean by uniformly divided is that, in fact, the great majority of the commissioned officers sided with the nationalists. They were fed up with the popular government. They were quite ready to follow the general's lead in a revolt against the Republican government. Uh, but the great majority of the crews were loyal, which resulted in many instances, crews essentially rising against their officers at the time of the revolt when they realized that, you know, while they were loyal, their officers were not. In fact, there's a famous incident, a really series of incidents at the very start of the revolt, because it just gives you a sense of how little planning was done on the part of the officers. Um, the officers took no steps to secure the radio rooms of the ships that were at sea. Well, in Madrid, there was a loyalist radio man who essentially orchestrated the seizing of the central communications facilities for the Spanish Navy, in Madrid, and then was able to broadcast to the radio rooms of all the ships at sea, saying, "Hey, pay attention to what your officers are doing. They may not be loyal." Uh, by the way, all loyal commands are going to come in plain language. So if you receive anything that's encoded, it didn't come from the government. It came from somewhere else. So, this actually encouraged many of the crews of the ships to say, well, wait a minute. We're not sure of what our officers were doing. Let's rise. Let's put them under arrest. Let's see if any of them will be loyal to us. So the result was you had a very bifurcated experience where if the ships were at sea, in almost every case but one, the crews rose, and these were not necessarily violent uprisings. They were just the crews saying, we've been told, officers, that you're not loyal. We'll find, someone, often warrant officers or engineering officers who, unlike the commission line officers, were less likely to be siding with the rebels. We'll find someone else to essentially take command of the ships, at least temporarily. Uh, uh, and the result of this was that despite the expectations of the plotters that of course the Navy will follow along,
Mm.
in reality something far different happened, at least for the ships that were at sea at the time.
Right. So, related to that, I suppose, is that obviously various parts of the country are picking sides quite quickly. So compared to the overall disposition of the fleet, whereas as you indicated, the majority of the crews are kind of taking the nationalist side, and so for everyone's clarity, the Republicans are the existing
Yeah,
government,
the
and the
Republicans.
nationalists are Franco's rebels.
Exactly. And so the crews are actually taking the existing government side, the
Right. So the
Republican.
crews are taking the ships over to the Republican side,
Yes, yes.
but even though the officers are nationalists for the most
Yeah,
part. And
yes.
then with the ships, obviously their various home ports are going to have their own alignment. So do any ships kind of go, well, we're going to be a Republican ship or we're going to be a nationalist ship, but then the people in port go, actually, about that, you're going to change your flag pretty quickly now.
That's a good question. And the answer is yes, absolutely. What you're discussing took place. Um, there were three main naval bases for the Spanish Navy. The base at Cartagena on the Mediterranean coast. Oh, by the way, I should apologize in
Mm.
advance. I'm going to butcher some Spanish pronunciations. I read a lot of Spanish to write this book, but I don't speak it.
Hmm.
So, uh, so apologies, Spanish speakers. But at Cartagena, the base pretty quickly is secured by Republican forces. I mean, there's a pretty abortive nationalist attempt to take over the base. It goes nowhere. And the base and the ships at the base are secured for the Republic. And that's important because that base is the primary base for both destroyers and submarines and has half a dozen destroyer hulls that have been launched, but are in the process of being completed. So with that, the Republic really reaps the bounty of the bulk of the Spanish Navy's destroyer and submarine force. The other two bases are Cadiz and El Ferrol. And those two bases are secured by the nationalists. There are nationalist militias in the area. The naval Marines, naval infantry, Spanish naval infantry are more loyal to the nationalist side than the Republican side. So they take those bases over. Cartagena, there are two small gunboats that are manned by crews that want to stay loyal to the Republic, but it quickly becomes apparent that's simply not going to happen. That they're overwhelmed by the nationalist forces there. They're unable to get out of the harbor. Uh, in Ferrol, there are more significant forces. There's a decommissioned battleship, the España, which has a caretaker crew on board. There's a light cruiser, Almirante Severa, which is in dry dock at the time. And there's a destroyer, the Velasco, which is acting as a gunnery training ship there in the port. Um, of the three, only the Velasco crew side with the nationalists. Velasco had a rather unusual commanding officer, unusual in the sense that he actually took an interest in the crew and in their welfare, and as a result, was able to win them over. They helped, no doubt, by the fact that the base was pretty quickly under nationalist control. The crews of the España and the Severa attempt to resist. I mean, they go so far as flooding the dry dock that the Severa is in, and opening fire on some of the base facilities with the cruiser's guns. But again, they're isolated. They have no hope of escaping from the port. And after a couple of days' resistance, they give in. So at the end of it, you've got a very unusual circumstance in that the Republicans have a fair number of ships. I mean, they've got two light cruisers, a number of destroyers, all of the submarines, and they've got crews, but they don't have officers. Uh, they may have them physically, but the officers are unwilling to serve or have already made it clear that, if they were put in command, they'd promptly try to, defect with the ships to the nationalists. On the nationalist side, you've got plenty of officers and no crews. The crews have almost uniformly, even where they've been, in nationalist ports with no hope of being able to realistically, fight against the nationalists. Nonetheless, they've declared their Republican allegiances.
Right. So everybody's kind of taken sides. The the nationalists, as you say, they're also kind of capital ship heavy, I guess, at that point, compared
Yeah,
to a decent fleet disposition. So,
right.
given that the Republicans seem to have sort of the more useful fleet to start out with, how do they end up using their ships against the nationalists?
The Republican fleet really has a number of missions, maybe too many missions at the beginning of the war. Probably first and foremost, when the revolt is launched, while the plotters hoped that it would be a relatively short affair as opposed to 3 years of warfare. Um, it pretty quickly turns out that their hopes are going to be dashed. And the mainland Republican or the mainland Spanish army, which is a conscript force, it's not well trained, it's not well equipped. It essentially falls apart at the outset of the revolt. So the nationalists look to Africa for their military force, where there is a Spanish army unit, the Army of Africa, which consists of the Spanish Foreign Legion and native Moroccan troops, which is it's a battle-hardened force, and it's a force that could easily tip the balance in favor of the nationalists, given that on the Republican side, the army is basically disintegrated, and while the Republic's arming militias, that's an extremely chaotic process. So, so mission one for the Republican Navy is keep the Army of Africa in Africa. And they do manage to do that for a period of time by patrolling the Straits of Gibraltar uh, and really slowing any attempt by the nationalists to move troops to a trickle. The nationalists manage a few troop movements right at the start of the revolt. They manage a small convoy early in August, but otherwise, at least on the water, they're stymied. What comes to their rescue is an airlift primarily one that takes place in with German aircraft, Ju-52s, which Hitler arranges the nationalists to have the use of. So the Republican Navy is stymied in turn because the air bridge passes over them, rather than ships trying to pass through them. So that's an early critical mission, and it's one that they accomplish to a degree because they delay the nationalist Army of Africa coming over, and that possibly has a major effect on the war, because by the time the nationalists have an organized military force, the Republicans have managed to cobble something together to resist them. So there's that. They also task the Navy with trying to interrupt supplies that are flowing to the nationalists from the Germans and the Italians. Both Hitler and Mussolini pretty early on decide that it's worthwhile to support the nationalist cause. Mussolini sees them as, to a degree, as ideological fellow travelers. Hitler sees this as a handy way to put a thorn in the side of France if there's an unfriendly Spain to the south. So military supplies start to flow from the nationalists or to the nationalists from the Germans and the Italians pretty quickly. And the Republican fleet does try to stop them. They stop some ships. They actually shell one that they see unloading supplies in the harbor, and they're met with violent protests from the Italians and the Germans, as you can imagine, and a significant Italian and German naval presence in the area, which dissuades them from doing that. The Republican Navy goes off in August to support an ill-fated and kind of half-baked attempt to take the island of Majorca from the nationalists, who were able to secure it early on. They do their bit, but they get their troops ashore, but the troops are ill-organized, ill-led militia, and they rapidly bog down, and the Navy winds up having to evacuate them a few weeks after they initially land. And then that gets to what really becomes the most important mission for the Republican Navy. As I said, early on, the Germans and the Italians decided that it was worthwhile supporting the nationalists with military aid. The Republicans needed military aid to fight the war as well. They were as poor in military resources as the nationalists were, but they had a difficult time finding it. The British government insisted on a policy of non-intervention, strict neutrality. The French, who would have been willing to support the Republicans, felt constrained to follow along with the British. The result was the Republicans got their weapons, by and large, from the Soviet Union. And because of the way that things broke geographically, the most convenient way for them to get those weapons to the Republicans was through the Mediterranean. So from the Black Sea ports westward across the Med to the Spanish Mediterranean ports. And the Republican fleet's most important job was safeguarding those supplies right at the end of their journey. They would cross the Mediterranean unescorted to French North African ports, and they could even shelter in those ports if they needed to. And then the Spanish Navy would send ships out from Cartagena to gather up the merchant ships that had made the passage, and then take them the last few hundred miles from the French North African coast into Cartagena itself. So the Republican Navy had a busy time of it. They did not swing at anchor in harbor.
And of course, you've got sort of suspicious submarine activity going on, which honestly isn't the Regimarina or the Kriegsmarine.
Right.
So there definitely is a need for escort, isn't
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, there
Uh,
is.
so I suppose that then the flip side to that is the nationalists, as we established, they've got a bit of a capital ship heavy navy, lots of officers, not too many crew. Are they able to utilize their ships? I'm kind of imagining one of the Hispanias sailing with the lowest rank on board is a lieutenant.
Yeah, they are, and it's really one of the great success stories of the Nationalist Navy. I mean, they had officers. They had a fair number of long service petty officers who were willing to side with the nationalist cause, and they filled out their crews with volunteers. There were a number of well, political parties, the phalangists, for example, the Spanish sort of proto-fascist party, who who had organized militias, who had people who were willing to volunteer for this kind of service. And they actually managed to pull that off. I mean, they had a slow start to it. It took them some time to get the Spaniard into service. And even when they did, I don't think they ever had all four of her gun turrets, in operation at any given time. But they concentrated the crews they had who were loyal, and Amarante Severa, and she was pretty active early on, cruising up and down the coast, bombarding Republican ports and harbors, and supporting some of the nationalist forces who were fighting on the northern Spanish coast, the coast that bordered the Bay of Biscay. In fact, Severa was so active that she shot her guns out, uh, with continuing problems throughout the rest of the war. So that was early on when the Nationalists finally got one of their heavy cruisers, the Canarias, in the water and commissioned. They then went south and pried the Strait of Gibraltar open. This was in the late September of 1936, and from there they concentrated on a blockade in the north. And there I should explain the areas of Spain that were loyal to the Republic pretty rapidly became divided in two. In the north, you had a swatch of territory from Gijón in the west to Bilbao, a little east of Bilbao, actually in the east, that declared for the Republic. But that area was cut off from the rest of Spain, the area of Madrid, Valencia, Cartagena, down to Malaga, which was also Republican. So what that meant was that the only way that supplies are going to get to the north, and the North Republican enclave needed supplies just as badly as the rest of it did, was by the sea. And the nationalists were quick to organize as best they could a blockade. They armed a series of trawlers, some of which were ex-Royal Navy trawlers that had been put in, sold out into Spanish service, became part of the Spanish fishing fleet, and then the nationalists said, "Aha, trawlers with gun platforms,
Hmm.
we can use those." And rearmed them and formed a patrol fleet, backed by some of the larger units. By that time they had España operating, cruising up and down the coast as best she could. I think the Basque nicknamed her grandfather as she wheezed along, although she would occasionally wheeze along and then fire her 12-inch guns at shore fortifications, so she could be an angry grandpa at times.
Hmm.
Um, when the nationalists were able to move to the Straits of Gibraltar, basing their ships on the Spanish Moroccan ports and also at Cadiz, that's when you saw the Republican Navy shift to a convoy escort role, because as you said, not only were there, suspicious submarine activity in the Mediterranean threatening the Republican supply line, but at that point, the nationalists also, despite having an unbalanced force, they still had a fairly potent force that could threaten Republican supplies. They couldn't park off the ports the way that they could in the North.
Mhm.
The Republican Navy, prevented that, but they could conduct kind of a cruiser raiding sort of warfare against Republican supply lines. So that, in a nutshell, was the nationalist Navy's war.
They're it's essentially they're kind of forcing each side to show strength rather than just random ships popping along and going, ah, I'm going to have that merchant ship.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
So I suppose given that you've got some potential areas of direct conflict, that then begs the question of were there actually any notable ship versus ship engagements where the Republican and nationalist fleets came across each other and decided to have a go?
There were. I counted, I think, more than a dozen ship-to-ship engagements that involved destroyers or larger. Many of these were smaller skirmishes. Um, I mean, one example is when the nationalist fleet, or when I call it a fleet, there was a two-ship fleet at that point when heavy cruiser Canarias and the light cruiser Cervantes showed up in the strait at the end of September of 1936 to try to assert nationalist control there. They surprised two Republican destroyers. Uh, and surprise was complete. The Republicans didn't even know that the nationalists had Canarias in commission at that time. So Canarias sinks one, the Admiral Ferendez, and Severa engages the other, Gravina, but Gravina manages to run actually down to Casablanca for refuge there. And that's an example of some of the smaller types of engagements that took place. There were two more significant engagements. One as a convoy action that was fought off Cape Churchill. Cape Churchill is a cape in Algeria, close to the port of Algiers. This was a battle that was fought in September of 1937. In the background is something I've already talked about, which is the Republican need to escort convoys of merchant ships that were gathering in these French North African ports. In this case, the Republican uh, escort consisted of a couple of light cruisers and 7 destroyers. And they had gathered a number of merchant ships together in September of 1937 that had been sheltering in these French North African ports. This was a time when, and I think we'll probably get to this later, the
Mhm.
Italian Navy had mounted a major effort in support of the nationalists to disrupt the trade coming from the Black Sea. But the convoy and its escorts had just started out when they had the misfortune to run across the other of the nationalist heavy cruisers, the Baleares, uh, uh, and so fought an engagement there that really reminds me, Drac, of if you think of uh, the Christmas battle
Mhm.
fought between Hipper and Berwick,
Yeah.
although this was fought in the daylight.
Mhm.
Um, the destroyers played little role because they had to defend the merchant ships against potentially submarine threats and air threats. The of the two light cruisers, one, the Libertad, was a fairly modern, fairly potent unit, but the other, the Mendes Niñas, was an older ship, but kind of like a C or D class, Royal Navy cruiser, and in fact based on those designs. So things look a little grim for the Republic, but Libertad fortunately gave for the Republicans gave better than she got. She hit Balearis twice, once with a round that shorted out her main electrical switchboard and basically knocked her fire control out of commission. Now, she was able sporadically to get her fire control back into commission, but basically from that point fought the battle with, figuratively one arm tied behind her back. The action went on for some time as the Baleares tried to get at the merchant ships, but Liberté was able to essentially keep her at a distance until it became clear that she had lost touch with the convoy and the action ended. So again, uh, uh, reminiscent of the Christmas battle, in the standoff between two cruisers, one trying to protect a convoy. And also, I would say a bit reminiscent to me of the Battle of Second Sirte, in that while Liberté managed to save the convoy, in this case, the merchant ships all ran back for the shelter of the French ports, at least one of them running aground,
Mm.
and with none of their cargoes making it to the Republic, at least for some months after the action. Sort of as in Second Sirte, where Vian manages to stand off the the Italians, but unfortunately, the fact that the merchant ships that are being escorted are diverted, and then not swiftly unloaded at Malta results in those cargoes being lost. So that's one major action.
Mhm.
The other major action takes place in March of 1938, which is relatively later on. And this is the Battle of Cape Palos. Uh, Palos has its start with the Republican plan to take Soviet-supplied motor torpedo boats from main Republican ports over to Majorca, where the nationalist cruisers are located. What they hope to do is surprise them at night with a torpedo attack. Uh, that plan doesn't work out. It's March in the Mediterranean. These are tiny motor torpedo boats. The weather's bad. The commander of the torpedo boat refuses to sail. And as a result, uh, Republican commander, Luis Ubieta, decides that, well, he's got a support force out of two light cruisers and five destroyers. He might as well conduct an offensive sweep and see what they see. Uh, so they are in the midst of doing that in the evening of the planned attack when as it turns out, they run across all three of the nationalist cruisers, the two heavy cruisers plus Severa, escorting a couple of merchantmen that are making their way from Majorca to nationalist Spain. Um, there are two meetings. The first one is one of mutual surprise, in which one of the Republican destroyers manages to snap off two torpedoes, but makes no hits. And then both forces maneuver out of sight of each other and almost coincidentally manage to come together again. Now this time, the Republicans are sure of what they're seeing. One of the things that you have to bear in mind, and this was a real constraint for both the Republican and the Nationalist Navy, was the fact that there were other navies that were active in the Mediterranean at this time. The British and the French Navy had significant units there, and neither the Nationalists or Republicans wanted to be responsible for engaging a French or a British ship. So it made some cases made them hesitant to start shooting. But in this case, the Republicans had no doubt. They got the drop on the nationalists and managed to torpedo and sink Balearis. which I'll note is the first treaty cruiser to be sunk in action.
Hmm.
Uh, many of these, 8-inch gun cruisers that were the children of the Washington Naval Treaty, fought and a number sank in World War II. But uh, 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 Balearis was a similar design, but found her end in March of 1938. It's another battle that was a tactical victory for the Republicans, but strategically was a nullity. By March of 1938, Soviet aid through the Mediterranean had largely dried up for a number of reasons. Uh, and at that point, the Republican fleet was almost in irrelevancy. This was an attempt to uh, become more relevant, perhaps by changing the balance of power. But in fact, the sinking of the Balearis had little effect on the overall dynamic of the naval war at that time, and the Republican fleet by that point was still a fleet that's still active, and as you can see, pretty potent, but one without a major strategic mission at that point.
Fair enough. So we've obviously mentioned a few ships getting sunk in these engagements,
Yeah,
but were there any notable losses to either side outside of directly confronting each other with guns and torpedoes blazing?
there were, as a matter of fact, both sides lost their battleship. Uh, the Nationalists lost España off the north coast to a friendly mine.
Oops.
There's no such thing as a friendly mine. Yeah, the Nationalists tried to blockade the Republican ports, not just with patrolling ships, but also with minefields. Their efforts were pretty modest because they simply didn't have great supplies of mines. Uh, but they did make the attempt, and España fell victim to one of those mines. Fortunately, she went down with little loss of life. And in reading between the lines, I really get the impression that there was a degree of relief among the Nationalist Navy that the ship was gone, but the crew was saved because they had other better uses with which to put the men that had been manning the battleship. Um, the Republicans, as I said, had a battleship as well. The battleship that was in commission fell to them. Uh, uh, Again, through a crew rising while she was at sea, and one of the few crew risings where there was significant bloodshed. The crew killed three of the officers on the ship, uh, and uh, uh, and went on from there to develop a reputation as being sort of the Red Guard of the Republican Navy. An unrestrained force against officers whenever officers were suspected of disloyalty. In any event, the ship Jaime Primero, Jaime One, was damaged on a couple of occasions by bombing in port. On the second occasion, she was brought back to Cartagena to be repaired and blew up while under repairs. You can add that to the list of ships that succumbed to powder magazine explosions while in harbor. Um, Fortunately, think about half of her munitions had been unloaded prior to the time that she blew up, which was a good thing because if she had blown up with all of her stores aboard, she probably would have taken other significant units of the Republican Navy with her. So yes, there were other significant losses. In addition, I mentioned the one destroyer that was sunk at sea. Others were sunk in harbor,
Hmm.
um, um, particularly by bombing attacks. The navies on both sides were fairly battered by the time that the war was over.
That's right. You just mentioned the bombing attacks. Did air power affect both sides roughly equally, or did one side's air power affect the other more so? Because obviously you've got you know the notionally nationalist and Republican air forces, and
Right,
then you've also got things like the Condor Legion, which is kind of like honestly not the Luftwaffe on a training deployment.
right,
Um,
right.
so is one side getting bombed more than the other, or is it kind of an equal stakes game?
I would say that the Republicans got bombed
Hmm.
more than the nationalists did. Although in neither case was there a great emphasis put on the use of air power against ships. Um, uh, the at the time of the revolt, the Republican Navy actually had its own air force. Uh, but on both the nationalist and the Republican side, there were advocates for independent air forces, which was very much the trendy thing at the time.
Hmm.
And as a result, both sides lost control of their air assets, which you can looking at the correspondence from the commanders on both sides, it just drove them to distraction. That the Republican leaders were constantly complaining about not having air support, not having aerial reconnaissance when they really needed it, and the nationalists were just as frustrated. So air power didn't play the role that it might have played had the maritime aspects of air power been given more of an emphasis. But nonetheless, there were some significant events. The only major damage inflicted on a warship at sea was inflicted on the Almirante Severa. She was on a mission doing some shore bombardment when a flight of Republican-manned Soviet SB bombers uh, 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 was vectored onto the nationalist effort. And remarkably, because normally the Republican approach was to bomb from about 10,000 feet in level bombing, which, as you pointed out in some of your videos, was,
Hmm.
not an effective way
No.
to try to hit a ship. But for some reason, this group decided that it should make an attack at closer to 3,000 feet. And turned out that was a pretty effective tactic. They hit Severo twice, uh, uh, once with a bomb that exploded and caused significant casualties, one with a dud, but the dud actually punctured the top can of one of her boilers and came to rest amidst the boiler tubes without exploding, which is amazing. And had it exploded, it might well have resulted in the loss of the ship. But she was able to return to port and get the thing diffused and removed before more damage took place. The Probably well, I guess I should also mention uh, uh, that was a Republican success. Uh, the Republicans had another successful bombing attempt, although it wasn't really what they intended. They also managed to hit the Panzerschiff Deutschland launch anchor in Ibiza. As I said, it was pretty common for the warships of other nations to be in or around Spanish waters at this time. Um, um, uh, and Deutschland had actually been based at Majorca with the nationalist ships. Uh, and then after the Republicans mounted a couple of bombing raids there, the Germans decided, it might be better to move to Ibiza, where we'll be safe from bombing raids. At the same time, the Republicans had intelligence saying, hey, there might be nationalist ships located there. And the result was a bombing attack that hit Deutschland and caused significant damages. One of the bombs exploded in a mess area, and several dozen of the crew were killed as a result of that. Also resulted in a German reprisal in which they bombarded the town of Almira in response to the bombing. So those were incidents, but I think the most consequential use of air power in the war came from bombing ports. What the nationalists discovered, but discovered only gradually, was that the most effective way to disrupt Republican supply lines was to bomb the ships in harbor. They were easier targets. They were easier to find. And by doing that, not only could you cut down on the ships available to the Republican government, but you could discourage neutral ships that carried much of this trade from continuing to do so. It was one thing to run the possible risk of a submarine torpedo, but that would be a relatively rare occurrence. But to be in a port that was being bombed on a regular basis was considerably more intimidating. So that was the main effect of air power. And Drac, as you mentioned, it wasn't just the nationalists. Both the Germans and Italians maintained air units at air bases in Majorca that operated against ports and also against ships at sea. The Italians and the Germans, I would say particularly the Germans, seemed pretty unrestrained in their enthusiasm for attacking any merchant ship that looked like it might be vaguely Spanish or vaguely headed for a Spanish port.
Fair enough. And well, while we're on the subject of Germans and Italians, I kind of alluded to this earlier. Were there any naval interventions, either officially or quote unquote deniably,
Yeah.
from the Kriegsmarine, the Regiermarine, or even the Royal Navy or the Marine Nationale?
Well, yes, there were. And I already spoke to one of them, and that is the German response to the Deutschland being bombed. That was quite officially a response. Another one that I'll mention, which is a bit of a fun fact, is in January of 1937, the Republicans detained a German ship off the northern coast that they thought was running supplies to the nationalists. The Germans responded by starting to capture Republican merchant ships and then turning them over to the nationalists. And there, the fun fact is that one of the ships involved in this effort was the Admiral Graf Spee. And in fact, the Spee's first merchant capture took place in January of 1937, well before the start of the Second World War. And of course, she went on, in the war to make several additional captures before being sunk off the River Plate. In addition to that, as I said, the Germans and the Italians were supporting the nationalists right from the get-go. The Italians would escort some of their supply convoys and troop convoys when they had volunteers, and I put that term in quotes, that moved from Italy to Spain to fight on the nationalist side there. German and Italian submarines cruised against nationalist warships, or I'm sorry, against Republican warships pretty early on. The Italians actually succeeded in torpedoing the light cruiser Miguel de Cervantes and putting her in harbor for more than a year. The Republicans really struggling to repair battle damage in ships that took it. Um, uh, and the Germans actually sent a couple of U-boats, U-33 and U-34, into the Mediterranean for a brief cruise, um, which was mostly fruitless. They were also tasked with torpedoing Republican warships. Uh, they they didn't find many because at this point the Italians had already had their success and the Republicans were getting a lot more cautious about risking their ships. But just as the cruise was ending, one of the U-boats managed to torpedo Republican submarine C3. So again, first blood for the U-boat arm of Ukraine, taking place in this case at the end of 1936, well before the start of World War II. The Italians mounted a major effort in the summer of 1937. They were spooked by reports that a rumored, huge convoy was sailing out of the Russian Black Sea ports that was going to, take a complete Russian Army Corps to Spain with, thousands of tanks and hundreds of aircraft. This was a complete phantom. It didn't exist at all, but it resulted in pleas of help from Franco and the Reggio Marina on launching a submarine and surface campaign that torpedoed and shelled warships all the way from the Aegean to the Sicilian Straits. So that was a major role. Apart from that, the Italians on an on again, off again basis also provided the nationalists with what they called legionary submarines. And the fiction here was that these were Italian volunteers commanded by a nationalist officer, and they would, provide a nationalist officer to sail in the ships or in the submarines. There was a fair amount of that, and then finally, after much prodding from Mussolini, the Italians Navy actually sold two of their subs to the nationalists to give the nationalists at least some undersea capability. So that's the Germans and the Italians. The British and the French played a much more public, less surreptitious role in protecting first the merchant ships of their own flags, and then ultimately the merchant ships of many flags against both the nationalist navy and the surreptitious attempts by the Italians to support the nationalist navy. This happened first in the north, where, as I said, the Republic or the nationalist navy was conducting a close blockade of the Republican ports. I mean, the nationalist approach was to what was to take as much rope as they possibly could in disrupting that trade. So they weren't particularly punctilious about observing the 3-mile territorial limit. They would, stop ships wherever they could. The British government actually had a very significant internal debate over the degree to which they wanted to, get involved in protecting British merchant ships in the north. There was a considerable support for the idea that we should just leave well enough alone. The British were pursuing a policy of non-intervention, and they really didn't want to intervene. But the opposition in government and the public outcry against the Spanish nationalists interfering with British ships, basically, squelch that idea. And so there was a pretty active British effort to protect British merchantmen that were making their way to ports like Bilbao and Santander and Gijón. That extended to the south as well, although there was not a direct, close nationalist blockade to be overcome. So incidents were a little more few and far between. But both the British and the French navies did get significantly involved in response to the Italian efforts that I outlined in the summer of 1937, because while the intention of the Italians was to attack just Spanish and Soviet flag ships, that was, of course, naive to think that would happen. They wound up, torpedoing, shelling, and in some cases bombing just about anything in sight. Now, these were at the times, these were the so-called pirate submarines. While the British and the French knew full well that these were Italians, it was sort of convenient for all concerned to pretend that, well, we didn't really know, whose submarines these were that were attacking defenseless merchantmen. But the result, which came out of a conference at the Swiss Stade of Lyon, was an agreement between the British and French navies to patrol safe routes that were laid down throughout the Mediterranean, in which they would attack, it started out with any submarine, or for that matter, any surface ship that looked as if it was going to in turn attack a merchantman that was traveling along these safe routes. So they were significantly involved as well, particularly with these neutrality patrols later in the war.
Right. So we know what everyone was doing and sort of who kind of had the upper hand in the end. So I guess the final question is, what was left by the end of all of this? Because they've started the war with the two Canarias class not even actually in service yet, but they managed to get one of them sunk during the war. Two of the Spaniards are down, and obviously another one had gone aground separately. So what kind of fleet does Franco inherit at the end of this? Is it kind of two gunboats and a rowboat, or has he actually got something worth calling a navy left?
Let's have something worth calling a navy, in part because the Republic is able to get its the six destroyers that we're building at Cartagena, all are brought into commission in late 1936 and in 1937. For the nationalists, they managed to commission, as we said, the two heavy cruisers and another three, mine layer escort vessels. They also managed to refit an old cruiser, an old light cruiser, the Republica, which becomes named the Navarra, but is dubbed by the Spanish nationalist sailors. They call her the Follow the Fleet, which is the title of a 1930s Hollywood movie. But they call the Navarra that because she's so slow that she's always lagging behind. So the nationalists, despite the loss of the Baleares, they have a fairly significant fleet at the end of the war. They get two submarines, as I said, from the Italians, and four destroyers as well. World War I era ships that may have been more trouble than they were worth, but were on the books. On the Republican side, at the end of the war, the Republicans still have three light cruisers in commission and a number of destroyers. These are all still based at Cartagena. But as the war comes to an end, in March of 1938, there's a revolt in the port, of a very confused affair involving some who were, nationalist sympathizers, others who were not national sympathizers, but were essentially revolting against the current Republican government. But the upshot of the revolt is that Cartagena becomes unsafe for the Republican fleet. There are threats by the rebels who have gotten control of shore batteries to fire on the Republican ships. So they wind up steaming first to Algiers, then to Bizerte, where they're interned, and then early in April are returned to the nationalists. So despite the long war, there's still a navy at the end. It's one of the remarkable things is that despite the significant operations that took place throughout the war, both sides were able to keep their ships steaming. I think in the nationalist case, some of them were on their last legs by the end, but they were still afloat, and they were still battle-worthy units. I think the last to retire was the Canarias, which soldiered on until 1975 before she ultimately went to the breakers.
Fair enough. So some survivors and some surprisingly long-lived survivors, given
Yeah.
that they're being run hither and yon all over the place with almost everybody on trying to shoot them. So, well, that's a short-potted history of the Spanish Navy in the Spanish Civil War. But of course, this is a fairly substantial book. It is one eye width thick. So yeah. So if you want to know the full story of what's going on and all its relevant details, then here is the book in question, available as I said from all good bookstores, and hopefully plenty of people will pick it up and bring some more light to this somewhat forgotten aspect. I mean, the Spanish Civil War itself, as we said, is somewhat overlooked anyway. But if you say to someone the Spanish Civil War, if anything, they'll say Condor Legion, Guernica, etc. The naval side of it hardly gets mentioned at all. But hopefully now this will change. So thank you very much to Len Heinz for coming and lending his expertise on the matter. And I guess we'll see you all on another video.
Thank you very much for having me, Drac. And as you said, I hope that this book at least sparks some interest in the maritime aspects of the war. There's a lot of fascinating incident and anecdote there, which we can only just touch on here. But there's, as you said, much more in the book, and I think really more to be discovered even beyond that.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. All right. See you all again later. Bye, guys.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.